Hey everybody, Cathey Armillas. I'm here. I know I'm not there, and I have something really cool I want to do with you though, because I don't want you to experience me in this really weird 2D kind of way. I want you to feel like you're experiencing the real me with you. I'm going to be available on October 3rd from 10 a.m. to noon Pacific Standard Time, live on my Facebook. It's just facebook.com/Cathey Armillas. To interact. So once you've seen my session, if you have some questions and want to chat it up with me, I'm going to be there. So, hey everybody, you have a great idea in your life, or you're aspiring to give a TED Talk, or maybe you feel like neither one of those apply to you. I still think you should stick with me here and listen to what I have to say. I'm a TED coach. I coach tons of people all over the world on their ideas or on their profession, on what they do. And, you know, for most people, the number one thing that they say is like, I don't really have any great idea to share with the world. Crazy, right? There's people that are working on like groundbreaking, things in their work. And when they're this close to it, they never see the importance of what they're doing. And in that same vein, I want you to know there's something in your life, an idea that you have, maybe something that you've experienced. Maybe it's your work. You have an idea that's worth being shared on the TED stage, or even if you never want to go that far, the people around you should experience that idea. So I'm going to talk today a little bit. I don't have too much time to get deep into it, but I want to talk about what makes a TED Talk great, because that's kind of my space, right? I'm a TED coach. I take all these ideas and I help people bring those ideas to the world. So let's start with this first, the idea. The idea takes the longest. Even when people come to me and they have a really good idea and they say, hey, this is my idea, what do you think? And I'm like, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. It's not stage ready yet. You have to really hone in on that idea. And I like to say you make that idea as wide and as deep as possible. As wide meaning like how many people can you get to aspire to that idea, to want to do something with your idea? How many people can you attract with your idea? You should make that as wide as possible. Here's a great for instance. My stepsister lives in Colorado. She's an architect, and she kept telling me for months and months, Cathey, you should watch this TED Talk. It's about why we should build wooden skyscrapers. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Yeah, I'll watch it, because I watch lots of TED Talks. And she kept asking me, did you see it? Did you see it? I'm like, no, I'll get to it. And I thought to myself, well, I know why she wants me to watch that. She's an architect, but why would I want to watch it? I was watching the TED Talk finally. I'm about 5 minutes into it, and I'm like, we should build wooden skyscrapers. I got so into this guy's idea, Michael Green. He really connected with me on way more of a level than just, hey, I'm talking to architects. I'm talking to everybody. So think about that. How wide can you make your idea? And then, this is an important one. How deep can you talk about your idea? Level 1, everybody might say that's a great idea, but what does level 2 look like? What is level 3? And ultimately, what does your idea look like if we do something with it? So that's the first place to start, is the idea. Always start with the idea, and always know that there's work to be done. You have to intentionally go wide, and you have to intentionally go deep. Then I have this program called How to Rock a TED Talk, and it was kind of me trying to put myself into a box. I know I don't like that, and say, here's what coaching in a box would look like. And I had 10 tips on how to rock a TED Talk, and it was from me watching 1,000 TED Talks. I decided to go on a mission and watch 1,000 TED Talks before I created this program. And at first I started keeping this spreadsheet, and it was like, so-and-so gave this talk, and it was this long, and this is where they gave it, and this is how many views it had. And then I would rate it like 1 to 10. But I quickly realized I can't just rate something 1 to 10. What I think is a 9, you might think is a 2. So I quickly started looking like, what were the actual, things that speaker did? How did they present their idea? What technical aspects did they use? And I broke it down into these 10, what I call essential elements. So I'm going to kind of run through those really quickly, just to give you a taste for what an idea could look like if you blew it up into a TED Talk. So the first one is having a universal theme. It really just goes back to the width. How can you make your idea accessible to as many people as possible? Make that idea wide. Think about a teenager in Tokyo that might watch your talk or might listen to your idea somewhere. How can they be just as connected to it as somebody maybe in your field of work or somebody close to you? So having a universal theme is super critical. And sometimes, you have to take a step back from your own idea and your work, and you have to say, what would it take to make it universal? Because at this moment, I'm talking, my voice, my language, the way that I talk is to a specific group of people. So intentionally make it wide. And the second one is catchphrases. People miss out on this all the time when they're giving talks or presentations. How can you say something really catchy? How do you take your idea and grab it and put it in something that's fire, like really fire? For instance, I have a really good friend, Lou Raja, and he's also a professional speaker. He was giving a TED Talk and I was coaching him. And he moved all the way from Africa to Ashland, Oregon. And he has this whole theory, and it was a book based on his life, is Africa my roots, America my wings. Africa gave him his roots in life and America gave him his wings. When he was giving his TED Talk, I'm like, well, how can we take that idea and go wide with it? How can we make this accessible to everybody, not just people that have lived in Africa and moved to Ashland? And what we came up with was the catchphrase, roots are who you are, wings are who you become. So we were able to take his life, his message, and make it accessible to everybody. So think about that. How can you take whatever it is that your idea is, how can you wrap it up into something really, really fire and give that back to your audience? Catchphrases. The third one is supporting evidence. In a TED Talk, you should not be talking about an idea on a stage and going, hey, I have this amazing idea and it's so amazing because I say it's amazing. On the TED stage, you have to give evidence. You have to say, hey, this is social proof, or here's psychological evidence, or here is this idea put into action. So how do you prove that? How do you show that supporting evidence? It's really critical. And it's one of the things I think the world has really clung on to with TED Talks, is people really love that. Speaker gives their idea and then says, here's what it would look like, or here's what it looks like when it's in play. So having supporting evidence is critical. Number 4 is a memorable model. Having a memorable model is something that you can wrap your idea up in, and basically, if you think about it like a book, how would you turn your idea into a book? What's kind of the model? If you've heard of John Maxwell's, his 21 irrefutable laws of leadership, that's a model. How do you take something that you're saying and you're giving this information and you wrap it up into something? This is critical in like the TED space. I had a client one time who she did a talk on bullying, and she said, in the workplace, bullying can happen too. It doesn't look the same as when you were a child and somebody bullies you for your lunch money, but in the workplace, it looks a little bit more like exclusion. So the more and more we talked about her idea and how she was going to present it, I said, wow, it sounds like what you're saying is this exclusion is like a loop. And she said, it's exactly a loop. Once you get on it, you don't know you're there and you keep going. And so then we created the model, the exclusion loop. And that's how we turned what she was saying into a concept. So think about memorable models. And the 5th one is the cool factor. Now this one's super interesting because adding a touch of cool to something is really good to do, but it's really hard too. Sometimes what you think is cool, everybody else might not think is cool. For instance, when I was doing my first TED Talk, I had written this poem. It was called The Giver's Reward, because my first TED Talk was about how you should mentor a child, mentor the youth. And I basically wrote this poem and said, hey, whatever you give to them, you get back tenfold. And I had a really good friend of mine, I grew up in LA, I had him beatbox my poem. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And right before I did my TED Talk, I was going to live audiences, testing my TED Talk. And everybody came up to me after and they were like, well, I liked your idea, but I don't know what that beatboxing thing was. And so for me, it was like, okay, that was a good test. People that didn't know me didn't realize that was That was cool to me, but not to anybody else. But I will give you a great example. There was a guy named Shane Koizan, who's a poet, and he gave a talk actually about bullying, and he did a spoken word poem, and behind him there was this awesome animation going, and then behind that there was a lady playing the violin, and it was just the right touch of everything. He's talking about the poem, this graphics going on, and then there's this violin playing. It was so cool. But you can't really create cool, so just if you're gonna add the cool factor in, make sure you check with other people. The sixth one is powerful visuals. Now there is a little, in the TED world, there's a little bit of a kind of a controversy. Some people are like, TED Talks should just be like a really good TED Talk, and the speakers should be so compelling that they just mesmerize the audience, and you don't need a visual to go with that. Then there, of course, there's people that are just die hard, like a visual always helps. I will say this. I personally think there's no such thing as a neutral visual. You're either using a visual and it's adding value, or your visual is taking value away. Now, I personally believe if you have a really good visual that backs up what you're saying, it's better. I mean, I have this story about how my Nana used to make homemade raviolis. And if I was telling you a story about her and I showed just like a stock photography shot of raviolis, it would be lame and it wouldn't really emotionally connect with you. But if I showed you a picture of my cute little Nana who's like 4 feet tall and her cute little, her cute little apron and her like flower face and flower hands because she's making raviolis, it would make more of a connection than it would with a visual that seems cold and not really connected. So powerful visuals is really critical. Sometimes visuals don't have to be a slide. It could be a physical object that you hold in your hand. Is there something really critical that you're talking about in your talk or your presentation and you can hold it in your hand? I had one client giving a TED Talk about childhood hunger, and she talked about this kid who in school, his teacher handed out paper plates and said, draw a picture of what you had for dinner last night. And one of the kids wrote the word nothing on a plate, and she had the plate. And so to hold that plate up, you just felt that. And the visual, even though you could put a picture of it up on the slide, I mean, there's something really powerful about seeing the actual plate that this kid wrote on. So if you are going to use a visual, make sure it's powerful. And one last tip, you can use your body as a visual. There have been plenty of TED Talks done by spoken word poets who will use their body and choreography to tell a story. So just think about a visual a little bit differently than you do. It doesn't have to just be a slide that's behind you. The next one's number 7. An emotional connection. You have to make an emotional connection with your audience at all times. If you have an idea and you want your audience to digest that idea, you have to make an emotional connection with them. And it doesn't have to be, your idea doesn't have to come across via a TED Talk. Again, it could be an idea that you're sharing within your sphere of the world, with the people that you know, or the work that you do, or your family, your friends. But just know this, you have to make that emotional connection. And when I really was studying TED Talks and I was watching different speakers, and sometimes some of the topics just out of the gate, they're more interesting than other topics. But there was always this like thread that the speaker, when they made an emotional connection with the audience, when they told a story that was really vulnerable, or they were humorous, or they found a way to really break through this thing that I call an invisible wall. I think anytime you're speaking or communicating, there's an invisible wall between you and your audience. And it's always your job as the communicator, the speaker, to break that down. And so I was watching, some of these speakers, and I'm like, whoa, they just like kicked that door down. And all of a sudden I felt like I knew that person. That's what you have to get in emotional connection. Now, it's really hard to do. Like, you can't just force that. That has to be something that comes from within you. So for instance, if humor's not your thing, don't say, hey, I'm going to all of a sudden become a comedian and I'm going to connect with my audiences. No, find a way to be vulnerable. Find a way to be transparent and open so that your audience will listen to you and they'll connect. But it's critical. So make sure it happens. Again, it can be through the use of humor. It could be through, just a personal story. Stories are always best. Always, always. You know why? Because nobody else can tell that story but you. If you tell a personal story and you tell it from your heart, it's not something that the speaker is like, oh, I heard that last week and I don't feel connected to it because it's the second, third, fourth time I've heard that. But find a way to make that emotional connection. It is critical. And number 8 and 9, I kind of grouped together because I noticed these things kind of went hand in hand. Not always, but many times. Number 8 is low point and number 9 is twist moment. I found when I was watching all of these TED Talks that many times a speaker would have this this great idea, this great moment right off of a low point in their life. Something would happen and it would cause them to have this low point and this idea would spurn from it. Well, and sometimes that idea, that low point would come with a twist moment where they were heading one direction, this thing happened and it turned them into a twist moment, but not always. Sometimes speakers have gotten on a stage and just said, hey, this happened to me. I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. So it kind of didn't really have the twist moment. And sometimes it was a direct result. So just making sure that you're always being aware. Some of these moments that you think are your worst moments in your life, they could be some of the best moments for other people. There's things that people can learn from them. So always think about that. Look back in your life. I like to teach people to keep a story file or a story bank, if you will. And it's just something little that you can keep on your phone. And anytime something happens or anytime you remember something that happens to you, note it in your phone. And it can just be one little sentence. It could be, the time I was taught how to drive by my uncle. I could just throw it into my phone. And I might be saying to myself in that moment, when will I ever use that? And you have no idea 2 years later, you might be communicating about something and go, you know what? I'm going to tell a story about that. So keep your stories somewhere where you can easily put them in and easily reach back into that story file, story bank, or whatever, and pull them out for later use. So always remember that your low point can always turn into a twist moment. And number 10, which I think is super critical, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the emotional connection, number 7, but it's being authentic and open. So being authentic, being authentically you. People cannot stand an inauthentic version of you. And many times we try to watch other people and we watch them and we love what they're doing and we feel connected to them. And there's something inside of us that makes us go, I want to be like them, or I love the way they delivered that, or I love the way that they talked about that idea. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. Be you. Be 1,000,000% you, because you are amazing, amazing you, right? And you are the only person that can be you. So be authentic to who you are. Here is a great story. I love Ron Finley. He gave a TED Talk on, the name of the TED Talk was called The Guerrilla Gardener from South Central. And he talked in his TED Talk about how he had this strip of land in front of his house and he started to grow a garden on it because, it's in front of his house and technically the city owns it, but, he has to maintain it. So he's like, well, there's a lot of people in my neighborhood that are starving, or I can turn it into a garden. That's what I do. I can turn it into a garden. So he turned it into a garden, and then the city sends him a note and says, nope, can't do that. And so he petitions against it and gets all these people to sign, and then he wins. So then he starts popping up all these community gardens all over South Central Los Angeles. And he, at the end of his talk, he's 100% him. So he says, if you want to meet with me, come to the garden with your shovel so we can plant some shit. Peace. And it was so authentic. If you watch that TED Talk, you're like, he just ended 100% on him. So be authentic. And then that thing about being open, people know when you're closing yourself off. I noticed in a lot of TED Talks that people were willing to kind of open the door a little bit and talk about something they normally wouldn't want to stand on a stage and talk about. But when you do that, I think your audience will always feel that emotional connection, just being you and being open. Now, just one little caveat, be careful. Don't open too much. Don't open the door so much that people are like, whoa, I need therapy. Just open it enough that people can get your transparency and your authenticity. So those are the 10 kind of essential elements that I kind of reverse engineered after watching. Now it's been thousands. I've watched so many TED Talks and I've coached so many people around the world. And I just want to leave you with this last piece of advice. You have a story. You have an amazing story. You have lived a good life, and there's been many things that have happened to you, good and bad, and a lot in between. And you can use those stories, you can use your ideas to help make the world a better place. Be brave enough to kind of dust off that idea if it's under there somewhere and you haven't been sharing it with the world, or if you have, be brave enough to take it to the next level, to the next step, and share your idea with the world, because the world needs you and the world needs your ideas. And I hope to see you. I'm going to be, again, live. I'm going to be on my Facebook, Cathey Armillas, facebook.com/Cathey Armillas from 10 a.m. to noon on Saturday, October 3rd. I hope to see you there where we can engage in person. Keep being amazing. Keep being you. Thinking about, things I wish I knew when I was younger, I think about how life evolves, and the older I get, the more I know about myself. And there's one piece of advice I would give myself if I could go back, and I would actually listen to myself, because that's crazy. I can't even imagine like the 13-year-old self actually listening to what I'm saying. But if she did listen, I would tell her, everything happens for a reason. And sometimes you don't know what that reason is. Sometimes, as horrible as things seem at that moment, you never know what's going to come of that. For instance, I was a single mom when I was 19 years old. I had 2 kids, and I was working a job during the day and I was working a job at night. And I couldn't even imagine life beyond just trying to take care of those needs and my children at that time. So had you come up to me in that moment and say, one day you're going to write books and you're going to talk to people and you'll inspire people to do things that they want to do, I literally would have been like, get out of my face. I can't hear you right now. But I think back to that time too, and I really think that everything that I went through, not only did it happen for a reason, it made me a better person on the other end. And so I definitely would say everything happens for a reason. You don't know whether that reason is good or bad at any moment.